everybody. Attention, give some love. Let me feel good. Increase the vibration. Dr. Charles Finch. Let me just say this briefly for those of you who may not know who he is. Our brother Dr. Charles Finch is one of the few researchers that has done intensive studies on the Dogon, our cities, ancient African math and technology. He is Charles S. Finch III. He's currently director of the International Health at the Morehouse School of Medicine. He's a 1971 graduate of Yale University and a 1976 graduate of Jefferson Medical College. He completed a family medicine residency at the University of California Irvine Medical Center in 1979. I won't go through the whole long list of bio. He has a whole lot, but you're going to hear that. You're going to feel it coming out of him. I want you to give another by the attention of him, give him some warm love that he's here. He stayed awake. He had longevity. He's going to close us out. Dr. Charles S. Finch III.
This is great. You know, when I was a young man, you can look at my head and tell me I'm no longer a young man. It wasn't any problem whatsoever for me to sleep until 12 o'clock noon. I'm not a young man anymore. And what I find is something changed at a critical moment. And what changed is that I switched from being a day person to an early morning person. Now, the reason why it's kind of hilarious with me nodding out back there is because, you see, I'm already 2 hours past my bedtime. My children laugh at me because 8:30 comes around, where's Dad? Oh, Dad's in bed. Why? Because I'm typically up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning every morning. But there's a reason for that. I like that time of morning, or I've come to like that time of morning, because the world is asleep. And it's a time of morning, at least for myself, when I can get to know myself. Because the world is asleep. And what I mean by that is that in the middle of the day, you can be off by yourself in your house. And there may not be any noise, there may not be any traffic, there may not be anybody around. But the world is awake, and so the attention of the world is also awake, and it impacts you. And so there's a kind of background noise in the middle of the day that's gone at night. And so, for me anyway, what that means is that there's something in me that starts talking to the invisible at that time. And in fact, typically speaking, when the spirits call you, they always call you early in the morning. When they want to talk to you, want you to get up and pray or meditate, that's when they do it. So when you find yourself getting up, waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning and 3 a.m. in the morning, you don't know why. And you can't fall asleep, back asleep. There's only one reason for that. It doesn't have anything to do with your nutrition or your biorhythms or your biochemistry or anything like that. It's the spirits calling you to come and enter into dialogue with them. That is their time, because you see they can't get their attention any other time of day. Because in your waking moments, in the waking moments of the world, you are engaged. Even when you're not engaged, the world engages you. And so when you disengage at that time of morning, then it becomes possible to open yourself up to spirit. So that's the reason why my time of day now is 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So 8:30, 9 o'clock, I'm out. This is late for me. Very late for me. But we're going to, one of the things I decided to do when I was trying to decide what we were going to do this evening together, I wasn't sure at first, and then I decided to bring forward some of the recent work I've been doing in an essay entitled From the Nile to the Niger, Evolution of African Spiritual Concepts. I wouldn't even say that most of this work is new or I should say, is the information new? And this is what I'm beginning to realize, is that so much work is not new. It's just the way in which it is put together. It has a new impact. It is paradigm shifts are very often not based on new information. They are based on the way in which information is rearranged and restructured. It gives you a whole different way of looking at the world. Now, before we get into that though, I want to kind of do a sort of preamble. You know, and I brought a bunch of slides and everything else, and I said, no, let's, we're not going to have time to do that, so let's be focused. And before we get into this discussion that we can formally title From the Nile to the Niger, the Evolution of African Spiritual Concepts in Time and Space, I want to look at a kind of, shall we say, prefigurement of this discussion. Because one of the things, I've come to learn many things in my own engagement with African spirituality, which has pulled me and drawn me into its orbit over the last 10 or 12 years, ever more completely and ever more deeply. And so I began to understand how the conceptualization of the world through the African spiritual vision has a way in and of itself of changing lives. We can start with what I call the African model of the self. This is not my model. It's a model that I have picked up from a colleague and friend of mine by Eric Borosu, who is from the country of Benin in West Africa. It used to be called Dahomey. It's not even his, so to speak, but it comes to me through him. And what is important to understand about this African model of the self is that there are multiple levels of selfhood in each and every person. There can be, depending on the African system that you are looking at, there can be as few as 4 or as many as 9. So the African personality operates on several different dimensions. And what you see in this conception, the African conception of the self, is that the self is kind of, you might say, an inverse pyramid. So that the smallest and least significant portion of the self, and yet the portion in which the self is grounded, is the biophysical. Me up here talking and gesticulating in my hands and my hair and my physical being. That is the smallest and in many ways the least significant and yet the most grounded part of myself. Next in this conception is the psychic emotional dimension or aspect of the self. Beyond that is the moral religious aspect of the self. Then there is the energetic part of the self. And in fact, in the African conception as well as the Native American conception, everyone has a twin. No, that's not even a good way of saying it. Everyone has another self. And that self is the energy body. The ancient Egyptians called it the Ka. It is not a twin, it is you, energetically speaking. And it is the second self, and it is that part of you which interacts with the invisible world, which constitutes about 98% of existence. Through dreams, through intuitions, through precognitions, through synchronicities, through prayers, through dialogue with spiritual beings, all that is mediated through the energy body. Why? Because when you reduce everything down, I don't care what it is, what conception, everything fundamentally is energy. That's all it really is. Even something solid is energy at a certain level of vibration. Everything can be turned into energy. In fact, the greatest breakthrough in the history of Western scientific thought was the specific law of relativity, 1905. Albert Einstein, an authentic genius. Energy is mc squared, the mass times the speed of light squared. So mass and energy are interchangeable, which is another way of saying scientifically that mass and energy are the same. Mm-hmm. But African thought, not only African thought, Eastern thought, Native American thought takes it farther. They're saying that there is an energetic self. But that energetic self is that self which mediates our spiritual processes, our psychic processes, yes, our magical processes, if you like. And indeed, those beings that bring together, because that energetic self, though connected to us, is apart from us, though it is still us. That's kind of hard to understand. It's a double yes, but it is ourselves energetically. It is those individuals that bring together the energy body and the biophysical body together that achieve Godhood. Because that process then allows a person who does that to interact and interface with infinity. Because African thought tells you that we are this is just a way station for us. We were on a journey, human beings. And we sort of got stranded here. And the definitive journey is a journey through infinity. And it is through the process of energy that definitive journey takes place. Even any conception that you have of that which is divine or deity is really a matter of conceptualizing something that is fundamentally energy. We give it attributes. We give it form. We give it shape. We call it God. We call it deity. We call it this. We call it that. But ultimately what it is energy. And final, the spiritual cosmic level, which encompasses all others. We all know about the three dimensions, spatial dimensions. We actually know four. We know length, width, depth. Einstein conceptually added a fourth, which was time. But he found out something very interesting and very odd, at least for him. There's something called quantum mechanics in physics. We're not going to spend a lot of time on quantum mechanics, but quantum mechanics says this. It says several things. It says, take an atom. Take a subatomic power, take an atom. Take the electron revolving or rotating around the atom. Quantum theory says that electron, you can know its speed or you can know its position, but you can't know both at the same time. The Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So that's the first thing that it says. Einstein hated that idea. He says because, at least conceptually from the scientific point of view, that meant that you could not characterize existence exactly and precisely. You could only characterize it in terms of approximations. You might even say probability. And he said God does not roll dice. That was his reaction to it. But quantum mechanics said something else. If you take a perfectly neutral experiment, that is, experiment from which everything is removed, heat, light, dust, air, anything you can imagine. The moment you look at that experiment, you change it. So the act of looking at the experiment changes it. That means, therefore, that there is an unbreakable nexus between the observer and the thing observed. And that means it's impossible to have absolute objectivity. There is no such thing. Now, Einstein therefore proposed what was called a thought experiment in order to get around this premise of quantum theory. He says, imagine two subatomic particles that collide. Particle A goes that direction, in that direction, to the farthest ends of the universe. Particle B goes in the opposite direction to the other side of the universe. Let's say you can know at any given time the position of particle A. You can measure the speed of particle B. Now there is a law that governs the behavior of particles that are colliding billiard balls, for example, so that you can infer the speed of A by reference to the speed of B. So what Einstein said, okay, at any given time, I can know the position of speed of particle A. I can know the speed of particle B, and then by complicated mathematical calculation, I can therefore determine indirectly the speed of particle A. So that is supposed to have confounded quantum theory, because he's saying it's therefore theoretically possible to know the position and speed of a subatomic particle at the same time. He said, except if those two particles, unless those two particles are interacting with each other by some spooky action at a distance. Those are the exact words that Einstein uses, which he said was inconsistent with our notion of reality. Except for one thing. So this controversy went on for 40, 50 years. Until a physicist in 1982 proved once two particles collide, particle A and B continue to interact with one another no matter where they go. I don't care how many billions of light years they go away from one another. Once they have touched, they are always connected. They even affect each other's momentum. So spooky action at a distance is reality, is true. Once something touches, it relates to the thing touched from then on by some invisible, unmeasurable mechanism. Of course, ancient African thought has known this for as long as there have been Africans on this planet. It means several things. It means, as is true in West Africa, where I spent a lot of time, there are healers who can stay where they are and heal people 100 miles away without moving. Number one. When you get back to this idea that things, the objective, in other words, if something, the mere act of observing something changes it, that means that process is mediated through perception. Perception changes things in and of itself. The act of perceiving. So, and the act of perceiving is what? Mediated through the mind or consciousness. So that is your fifth dimension. Mind, consciousness, cosmic perception, and that fifth dimension encompasses the other four, including time. And when you put that together with the energy bodies, that's the reason why in the African framework it is possible, as the ancient Egyptians knew, for certain depths, literally to be two places at the same time. And now there's even scientific way of explaining that. Second thing is, through this conception, where mind, conception, consciousness, and perception encompass the other four dimensions, length, width, depth, and time, it also means there is something that moves faster than the speed of light. That's what Einstein said. In his world, light is the limit. You can't go any faster than light. But when you begin to understand that there's a fifth dimension, consciousness, mind, perception, there is something faster than the speed of light. Thought. Now, what I want to say is that there are African adepts who have taken advantage of these realities of existence, know how to manipulate them, such that you wonder why the Dogon knows so much about Sirius. Why? Because they've been there. And they didn't go. They didn't need rockets. Because you see that there is, when you start understanding the dimensions or the ramifications of this model, then there is literally no limit to human action. And when I say there's no limit, that's exactly what I mean. Except limits that are imposed, self-imposed, or imposed by society itself, because that's what society does to children. In the process of acculturating and socializing children, which is necessary, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, you have to do it. But you also limit them. You circumscribe their field of action. And so what people who are in a spiritual dimension do and must do is that they have to unlearn everything that they have been taught as a process of socialization, because they have to break the barriers of perception that surround them. Once you do that, there's literally no place you can't go. And you see, today, there are African adepts who can do that. The women can do it even easier than the men can, because they have an affinity to the invisible world. All of these dimensions in concert comprise the total self. In order for the self to be in a state of total health, all of these dimensions must be in harmony and balance. Imbalance or disharmony in one of these dimensions means that the self is not completely healthy. Note that the biophysical dimension, the one that has been almost the exclusive concern of modern Western medicine, is, in this scheme, the smallest and least significant dimension. Thus it can be said that the physical well-being, while essential to good health, is by no means sufficient for good health. For both for health and completeness, the real task of human beings is to strive for the conscious unity and integration of all human dimensions. Only then is freedom, in the truest sense, possible. I'm not talking about political freedom. I'm talking about freedom to roam the universe. That's the only freedom worth having, to take the truth. It is your birthright, you. That's right. Man, you forgot it, maybe. I don't mean to make it any less true. Let's look at the African family diagram, crossing through the self. In this way, the African personhood is understood in this kind of crossing phenomenon. The vertical axis represents invisible relations. The horizontal axis represents visible relations, because in the African family, your ancestors, up to your great-great-grandparents, are real people. They may be invisible, but they're real. and they are part of the family. And if you do not recognize them and acknowledge them as part of the family, all you're doing is creating nothing but trouble for yourself, because they will get your attention in a way that you're not going to like. And the worst thing that you can do to an ancestor is to ignore an ancestor. They don't like that. I mean, they really don't like that. Now, so in the African family, the vertical axis and everything does what? It comes together in the person, in the self. So the ancestors and the yet to be born, not the unborn, but the yet to be born, were also members of the family.
Go ahead.
But in the African frame of reference, you are born and reborn in your family. You're not just reborn anywhere you go. In the African framework, you're not even reborn in rocks and in insects and animals and in somewhere else in the world. You are reborn for your family. So, what does that mean? That means that every child was an ancestor. You are your own ancestor. Your children actually might be older than you.
Come on. That's right.
Now, you begin to understand a couple of things. Because in the horizontal visible, you have your parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts and uncles, spouse, children, grandchildren. These are visible relations. If, in the African framework, you are going to be born in your family, you can see why the ancestors, therefore, would have an overpowering interest in what happens to the family. I mean, after all, do you want to be reborn in a dysfunctional sociopathic family, or do you want to be born in a happy family? Make your choice. If you don't care, well, then you get what you get. So the ancestors, therefore, have a vested interest in what happens to the family. The other thing in this schema, what is it that's not going to be done hardly at all? I'm not going to say never, but almost never. That's common in the modern world. 3-4 million times a year in America.
Abortion.
Now, if a woman decides to have an abortion, what is she doing? She's supporting the ancestor. It's not a never. There are certain conditions under which abortion will be allowed. But only if the ancestor who is going to be the newborn agrees to it ahead of time. And there are those wise women in the village who have the ability to talk to the yet to be born to get them to agree. If there's some really overwhelming social reason. But as a matter of convenience or birth control, modern American women scare the hell out of me. And I'll tell you why. You've got an ancestor, wants to be reborn. For whatever reason, a woman decides it isn't time, it's not convenient, I'm not ready, any and all of the above. What do you think? What happens to the spirit of that baby that yet to be born? It doesn't disappear, you know. What do you think happens to it? What do you think it does? It causes holy hell is what it does. There are real, let's not get into the moral question. I'm not interested in the moral question about abortion. I'm just interested in the practical reality of it. And the practical reality is that the spirit of the unborn baby is going to wreak holy havoc on the life of that would-be mother.
We love it. Love it. Good example.
I'm sorry?
Love it. It's a good example.
There are ways to cool it out, by the way. There are ways to reconcile. That's one reason why I got so interested in African spiritual practices and traditions, because there are ways of taking care of almost anything. But the point is, it really needs taken care of in our society, because I'm telling you, it's at the root of much of the havoc, the social devastation that you see among us today. I didn't start out being against abortion. I didn't start out that way. I'm a physician. But when I became aware of this overnight, and I'm not a card carrying, I don't go out and bomb abortion clinics. I don't say much about it, but I'm telling you, when it comes up, and when women come to me, I very often have women coming to me, and the first thing I'll ask them and say, and it's interesting, nobody has ever refused to tell me, have you had an abortion? And since the answer is 50 or 60% of the time, yes, I said, that needs to be taken care of first. And if it's no, I said, okay, at least we don't have to worry about that. We can move forward with whatever the problem is. But then this abortion situation, you've got to take care of. It's got to be taken care of. You'll never have any peace in your life until you do. Because that unborn baby is not going to give you any peace. Ever. And when you look at this, you begin to see why. So, and abortion doctors, I pray for them. They scare me. I wouldn't want that kind of spiritual energy arrayed against me. It frightens me to think of it. And it frightens me on behalf of the people themselves. It's one reason I couldn't go into OBGYN. There's two things I couldn't do, is hack out women's wombs and do abortions. Now, let's look at this whole issue. Get the wrong one. In time and space. We're going to shift gears a little bit and begin to put things into a historical perspective. Always, for me, the historical perspective is paramount and essential. Perhaps because I truly believe in the adage that says, to understand the future, you must know the past. Why is that so? Again, if you understand the African conception of time, it becomes completely intelligible. How does African time go? It doesn't go like this. It's not an arrow. It's circular or spiral. And it plays into the African concept of karma, because they do have a concept of karma, even though they don't call it that. I don't know if we'll have time to get into that this evening. In the language of alchemy, each life has potentially a magnum opus or a great work to accomplish. For Sheikh Anta, it was to mention, not Diop, Job. For Sheikh Anta, it was to mend and repair that ruptured cord that tied contemporary West African history to that of ancient Northeast Africa, i.e. to Nile Valley civilizations whose origins were traceable back to 10,500 BC at least. Much was achieved by Job and others, reforging those linkages in the domains of language, culture, manners, customs, and material artifacts. Though the domain of religious ideas has not been ignored, more work remains to be done to establish that indelible connection linking theology, symbols, and spiritual conceptions of ancient Nile to those of West African cultures, particularly those now situated in the areas encompassed by the broad geographical arcs delimited by the Senegal River, the Niger River, and the Benue River. It is here that the traditional West African religions or world systems, when examined carefully, reveal numerous and unmistakable parallels to ancient Nile Valley thought and religion. It has become ever more important to reestablish the continuity of African history, particularly at times when you hear more and more of the calls for an African Renaissance, which was first actually articulated by Job in 1948. Now that's well over 50 years ago. They have become ever more insistent, since there is absolutely no prospect for such a Renaissance without an exploration of the most dynamic and empowering of African spiritual values. A study looking at the comprehensive universe of African spiritual meaning in time and space is indispensable. When we look at the divine powers of the ancient Nile Valley, the word that comes into play is neter, or the plural is neteru. As used by the ancient Egyptians, it is usually translated as, quote, God or deity, but others have maintained the word meant or implied self-existence or eternal renewal. It may have been related to the Egyptian name of Neith, whose name Net meant that which is. Others have stated that neter in effect meant simply a power or a principle. And the symbol of the neter seemed to have been the stone axe. The reason for this tool symbolizing the neter is obscure, but in other parts of Africa, the hatchet is associated with certain divinities. That is to say, Shango, who is the Orisha of thunder and lightning among the Yoruba. Though the entire Egyptian pantheon was eventually to consist of 2,000 neterus or deities, the conception of a single creative power, i.e. of a supreme being, is present from the very beginning. The ancient Egyptians called this being Wa, literally the one, or sometimes Neter one, or Neter Wa, which meant literally God one. We say one God, they said God one. The Neteru, thus, were the active powers or principles of the one. It could therefore be said that the Supreme Being was the one whose powers, i.e. Neteru, were many. Thus, what we call monotheism resolved into polytheism and vice versa. Several categories of Neteru are discernible in the ancient Egyptian pantheon, in the same way that the Greeks distinguished between titans, the gods proper, and the demigods. Among the ancient Egyptians, there is clearly an older cycle of Neteru, and they represent the cosmic powers of primordial creation and order of the universe. They inspired deep reverence and awe among the dynastic Egyptians for everything in the universe, including all of the Neteru, was said to have sprung from them. They represent the oldest concept of deities known to the ancient Nile dwellers. I'm just going to speak here of just a few of these. I'm going to skip because of the length of this manuscript. None or new was the initial uncreation, the prime material of existence, the initial uncreation. Theophil Benga has shown that the pyramid text described a pre-created material state known as none, the primal or abyssal waters out of which all created things emanated. This watery matter becomes conscious of itself and projects outward, igniting creation. The other way of looking at this is what happens in what? The female womb, which is the microcosmic image of the universe in its primal state. Now, if you look at the universe, 95% of it is what? Space. Yes, there's a name for it. It's called dark matter.
Come on.
You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't measure it. It is dark matter, and it is 95% of the universe. Just like 95% of our mind is unconsciousness, 95% of the universe is dark matter. And yet, in all the creation descriptions, light emerges where? From what? From the darkness. Now, why does light do that? Where does light really come from? What produces light? What is the most common thing to produce light?
Explosive gases.
Yes, but those exploding gases are caused by what? Heat. Heat. It is the heat, it is the germinating heat from within the womb that causes the light to come forth. But it comes forth out of a primal darkness that encompasses everything. And that darkness and that primal state in the African conception is water, or watery. So that you will find that everything in every African cosmic conception relates to water as a primal element of creation and of existence. It is why so many of us like being near the ocean, near rivers. Why? Because, you see, that is the element that African people are, quote, in charge of. This watery matter becomes conscious of itself and projects outward, igniting creation. Atum, who is the primal word name for Adam and Atom. The Adam, who is in Genesis, and the atom, which is the smallest indivisible unit of matter, according to Democritus, which he brought from ancient Egypt. Adam, in the form of a serpent, was the upsurge of none that prefigured creation. All potentialities and possibilities are contained in this primal matter called none, and begin to manifest at the first moment of creation, which is the beginning of beginnings, which the Egyptians called Tepa or Tep-Sepi. In ancient Egypt, then, there existed a speculation about what existed before the beginning of the universe, a state that modern physics assumes is impossible to imagine. Now, for the ancient Egyptians, the cosmic A was the universal A containing the divine breath of life, and was an image of that out of which all creation emerged. The great cackler, the goose, the primal goose, was that from which the cosmic A came. It is interesting that astrophysicists have found evidence that the universe is closed. And since the universe curves elliptically, if it's closed, then its ultimate form is that of an egg. The four primordial pairs represent the fundamental state of things just before the creation of space-time. Thus, of existence just prior to the existence of the universe. The existence before existence. The ancient Egyptians posited this. That which existed before existence. They were paired as follows. There was Nu and Nut, the male-female aspects of the primal waters. Nut became the personification of the heavenly ocean. Hehu and Hehut, the male-female aspects of the infinity of time. Keku and Kekut, the male-female aspects of the primal darkness. Amen and Amen, the male-female aspects of the hidden or invisible or the activity in earth. So these four powers, actually 8 powers, personify existence at the time when all was watery, timeless, dark, and invisible. And what do we say in Genesis? How does the Creator activate Genesis? He moves, the breath, the Spirit moves on the face of the waters in the darkness before he creates the firmament. At the beginning of dynastic times, about 4000 BC, in each of the 24 original nomes of Egypt, there was established a well-delineated cycle of divine triads, and indeed Egyptian religion as a whole, with its rites, ceremonies, and conceptions of deity, is well advanced by
4000 BC, that is 6,000 years ago. It seems likely that in earlier times, each district worshipped its own divinities, which were all incorporated into the body of Egyptian religion by the unifying trend evident in the period leading up to the unification of Egypt in 4000 BC. Several of the more important local triads became worshipped nationally, and their symbols, attributes, and liturgies became important generally throughout Egypt. And as I say, so there were at least 24 original triads, which again, we won't go through each one, because I want to skip to something else as a way of streamlining this discussion. I want to go to the period of transition. So I'm not going to talk about the triad of Anu, which was Ra, or the Osirian triad. Osiris, Horus, and Isis. Or the triad at Memphis, Ta, Sekhmet, and Nefertiti. I do want to talk about the period of transition, however, because it is actually critical for our understanding. Between 1680 and 660 BC, Egypt experienced one significant era of conquest, that of the Hyksos or the Shepherd Kings from 1680 to 1580 BC. The Hyksos were probably a nomadic peoples of the eastern desert between the Nile and the Red Sea, who took advantage of a period of inner turmoil and weakness in Egypt to overwhelm the country almost without a fight. These Hyksos would have had religious and cultural links to the people of Canaan, and it is during the period of the Hyksos rule that a small, marginal band of shepherds, led by their patriarch Jacob, who also was named Israel, migrated into Lower Egypt. After driving out the Hyksos, the native Egyptian kings from Upper Egypt established their rule, and the 18th dynasty at Thebes or Luxor began a campaign of conquest that eventually resulted in an empire stretching from the Blue Nile, Khartoum, and what is now Sudan, to Anatolia, which is now Turkey. During this period, known as the New Kingdom, Egypt reaches the zenith of her imperial power, wealth, and glory, which more or less continues through the 19th dynasty, that is from 1580 to 1200 BC. At the end of the 19th dynasty, Egypt under Ramesses III must repulse or repel an invasion of a powerful coalition of northern Mediterranean pirate nations known as the Sea Peoples. Though Egypt is completely victorious against the Sea Peoples, from the 20th dynasty on, a slow but inexorable decline is noticeable. So much so that by 750 BC, Egypt has come under the hegemony of its powerful neighbor to the south, Kush or Ethiopia. In fact, Kushite pharaohs lead their armies north to restore order in a rapidly disintegrating political environment in Egypt, and by 730 BC have established the 25th dynasty in Egypt. There is a mini renaissance in Egypt that flourished briefly during the 25th dynasty, but within 40 years, Egypt is menaced by a non-African aggressor for the first time in 500 years. These are the Assyrians. The Syrians, after a succession of battles stretching over 20 years, defeat the 25th dynasty, the 25th dynasty pharaoh Taharka in 660 BC, forcing the Kushites to retreat to their capital southward in Napata. Though the Assyrians' domination of Egypt is short-lived, their victory against the 25th dynasty pharaohs seems to set off a series of invasions from outside Africa that will continue in waves for the next 1,300 years. One after another, warlike nations bent on empire, Persians, Macedonians, Greeks, Romans, follow the Assyrians and wash over Egypt until at last Egypt the pharaohs vanishes from history. The invasion of the Nile Valley have repercussions beyond the borders of Egypt itself. They are in fact felt along the Nile all the way to the confluence of the Blue and White Nile at present-day Khartoum. What is not sufficiently appreciated is that the lower or two-fifths of the Nile, the lower or northern two-fifths of the Nile was united by ties of history, culture, and geopolitical overlordship of both Egyptian and Cushitic rulers into one great cultural complex. So you can't just talk about Egypt, you can't just talk about Kush, you've got to talk about Nile Valley civilization that stretches from the Mediterranean to Khartoum. That's like 2,000 miles. Yeah, I'll be finished. It is thus possible to speak speak of Nile Valley culture in exactly the same way that one might speak of European culture. Thus, when Egypt and Nubia are assaulted by shock waves of invasion and conquest, the whole region tremors. Indeed, these very invasions set in motion events which would have a decisive and permanent impact on West African history. There is a Senegalese professor by the name of Boubacar Lam, L-A-M is his last name, who was a disciple of Sheikh Anta Diop. In the 1980s, made a startling discovery. There exists, now listen carefully to this because this is kind of important. There exists a Senegalese oral history, collected and compiled, only to be forgotten shortly after World War I, by a man named Yoro Jaw, who was a Tukulor in northern Senegal, which details and documents migrations into West Africa from the Nile Valley. From the Senegal River in the north to the Niger Delta in the southeast, the major ethnic groups, virtually without exception, preserve traditions of an eastern or a northeastern origin. These traditions have been commented on by ethnologists and historians. Some, such as the Yoruba antiquarian J.O. Lucas, have gone so far to link some of these ethnic groups to ancient Egypt itself. Reverend Samuel Johnson, also a Yoruba, in the 19th century wrote a book called The History of the Yoruba, went so far as to say that the Yorubas, at the very least, can trace their remote origins to Nubia. Moreover, Sheikh Anta Diop himself used comparative linguistic analysis to show the manner in which several Senegalese ethnic groups, the Wolofs, the Serer, the Pul, the Tukulor, and the Jola, all migrated to Senegal from an area where Egyptian language was spoken or had influenced the local languages. However, Professor Lam has found an extraordinary oral record whose existence had been forgotten because these Senegalese sagas describe no fewer than 6 migrations from Northeast Africa. The first one beginning late in the 6th century BC, at the time of the Persian conquest. So that was about 525 BC. And the last one beginning the 7th century AD, right at or just before the time of the Arab invasion of Egypt around 632 AD. Thus, the ethnic traditions along 2,500 miles of the West African coast that have linked dozens of people to Nile Valley culture are shown to have a solid historical basis in fact. Moreover, dozens of inland people of the Western Sudan, i.e. the Dogon, have equally strong historical links to the Nile Valley. It would require detailed ethnographic work, including careful analysis of oral histories, to determine which of these people moved when into West Africa when. However, it should be possible to determine which peoples were sent migrating west as a consequence of which invasion, going back to the Persian invasion of 6th century BC, and possibly back to the Assyrian invasion of the 7th century BC. Okay, before I move on to the last 5 or 10 minutes or so, I just want to re-emphasize that point. From the Senegal River in the north, the Congo River in the south, and maybe even farther, we're talking 2,000, 2,500 miles. The sub-Saharan West Africa coast, as we understand it, the major ethnic groups in any country, without exception, trace their origins east or northeast, most of which, linguistically and culturally, should be shown to have had ancient links with the Nile Valley, Nubia, Egypt, etc. And here you have these oral traditions that affirm this very thing. Now why make all of this point? Because African Americans, where do we come from? 90% of us, 95% of us come from that same coastline, from those same ethnic groups. So when African Americans, or Africans in the diaspora, not just in America, but in the diaspora, let's use it like that, reestablish and reconnect with ancient Egypt, this is not fabrication. This is real. The blood of ancient Egypt through West Africa flows through the diasporic African communities, as it still does in West Africa. So this isn't just, we aren't just fabricating or manufacturing a mirage in terms of our ancient connection to ancient Egypt. It is not merely a nice or just not a very nice or uplifting thing to do to reconnect to ancient Egypt. It is fundamental and essential to the future. You're not claiming anything that doesn't belong to you. You're taking back which has been taken away from you. Mind, history, culture, language, all of it. Yes, spirituality. Now, the last 5 minutes, I just want to show a couple of things. In this particular instance, what I have done is do kind of, through these columns, a comparative analysis of 2 West African religions and ancient Egyptian religion. I just took these 2 because I can find the most information about them. You could do it with other West African traditions. On the one hand, I took Dahomey, which today is known as Benin and Togo. These people of the farm, the Popo, the Mina, the Aja, and their western neighbors, the Yoruba, anciently known as the Oyo Kingdom, and then comparing them to Egypt. You'll notice that at the top, there are the names of their creators. Mawalisa of the Dahomey, Olorem of the Oyo, Egypt, Ra, the creator who made the universe by opening the eyes, then withdrew from its affairs, the supreme being of each one of these pantheons. Let's now look at the powers. These powers representing the active principle of the one deity. When the God, if you will, or the deity, or the supreme being acts in the world, or acts in the universe, that being acts in the person or in the energetic configuration of these powers, which in Dahomey or Benin are called Vodou, in Nigeria among the Yoruba are called Orisha, and among the ancient Egyptians were called Neter or Neteru. So among the Vodou, Da and Lisa are correspond to Obatala among the Orishas, Ta-Atum among the Neteru, attributes, molded human beings from clay, king of the gods, master of wisdom, lord of the white cloth. Not all of these comparisons, in other words, not all of these powers have all of the same attributes, but they have the same energetic configuration, the same, and many of the same attributes. Da actually is the great cosmic serpent that assisted Mawalisa in the creation of the universe, without which Mawalisa could not have created the universe, and is therefore closely connected with Lisa. Mawu is the female part, is the female aspect of the creator. Lisa is the male aspect of the creator. Obatala is the lord of the white cloth. All of them, Ta, Tum, Ta particular, also, like Obatala, molded humans from clay, just like Da molded the world from clay, king of the gods, master of the wisdom, lord of the white cloth. 2, Olusada, who is the wife of Da. The Orisha is Oduduwa. Some say that Oduduwa is male, many or more say that Oduduwa was female. Neteru Ta'er Asis, the primal mother of the universe. Number 3, Mamiwata among in Dahomey, Yemoja in Yoruba, Hathor Nut in Egypt, the mother of life and humanity, but most importantly, the great mother of the waters. Number 4, Agbe or Agwe, Olokun Nuhaki, god of the bottom of the ocean and of the heavenly and earthly waters. We don't have time to, I'd like to talk more about them individually, but I'm trying to close up here. Fa. In Dahomey is Orun Mila or Ifa in Yoruba, because Ifa, the oracle of Ifa, originated in Ile Ife among the Yoruba and passed into other parts of West Africa, including Dahomey. Exactly the same as Tahuti, or thought, master and reader of faith, God of knowledge and science. Legba, and we see Dahomey and the Fawn, Dahomey and Oyo were kingdoms that were right next to one another. And the Fawn and the Popo were Yoruba, and the Yoruba, the Fawn and the Popo on the one hand, the Yoruba on the other hand, were right next to one another. And so we see that their names for some of these powers are exactly the same. Legba among the Dahomey, Elegba or Eshu among the Yoruba, Thoth and Anubis. Master of the crossroads, messenger of the gods, divine trickster, guide of souls. Goon in Dahomey, Ogun in Yoruba, Horus in Egypt, god of war and metals. Dahomey, Heviosa, Oyo or Yoruba, Shambo, Egypt, Set Amen. In other words, Set and Amen are kind of be considered as a composite because as a way of encompassing the attributes of these West African powers. Master of thunder and lightning, symbolized by the ram. Number 9, Mahobadi. Oya, Bas Sekhmet, goddess of the winds and of the sun's fire, of the ancestors and of the world of the dead. Tohosu, Oshun, Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, sensuality, associated with rivers, pools, and streams. Sakpata and Songhana. Again, you can see really the names are almost exactly the same. Similar to Sekhmet and Geb. The reason why is Sekhmet, who is actually female, because Sekhmet, deity of the plants. Geb, who is the earth deity, because these are also earth powers, male earth powers, as Geb is. Jede Metenofi, Egungun, Osiris Anubis, deity of resurrection. Something missing. I think that meant to say Lord of the Dead. That got missing. Okay, we're almost finished here. Number 13, Manono Nanabukan Heket Asin, goddess of reproduction, resurrection, and magic. Azizon Usain Imhotep, god of medicine and herbs. Adjen Ochosi, Anubis Anubis, god of hunters. Loco Oko Osiris, god of growing plants and trees, god of agriculture. The pantheons of each of these systems is far larger than outlined here, consisting of hundreds and even thousands of deities. However, the ones enumerated above list represent the principal divine powers of these systems. In each system, the powers personify the attributes of the Creator. That is to say, when the Creator acts in the universe, each action takes the form of one of the Vodou, Orishas, or Nephilim. In that sense, though these powers have all been anthropomorphized, that is, being humanized, what they really represent is energy, divine energy. They therefore cannot be defined by human moral categories. And that's what they all represent, divine energy. Okay, we could go on and on and on through explanation, but let's bring this to a close now. We have had to kind of jump around conceptually to begin to, what is the word, explore, grasp, sink our teeth into an African spirituality that encompasses time and space of the human existence on earth. What I'm hoping that we are beginning to grasp is that African spirituality, African religion, is not, and was never a static entity. In other words, mired in stasis, petrified, fossilized. It is an ever-becoming phenomenon, a process of becoming, a process of evolution. That in every age and every era, not only shapes, but is shaped by that time and place. As it is now, as it always has been. Thank you very much.
Finch. Everybody thank you for the information. We thank our brother for coming through and sharing with us. We have one more, y'all. One more. We're not leaving right now. We have one more. That's right, we do. We do. Our brother Dr. Neely Fuller is here, and we want to make sure we give him an opportunity to share with you. We got one